Let's start with domain 4. So domain 4 is about cloud application security. It is again an important domain having a 17% of the weightage in exam. And we saw the basics of cloud, the architecture of cloud. We saw the concepts of data and how it can be secured on cloud. We saw the infrastructure and its security on cloud. And now we get into the further concept of securing the applications on cloud. Now, there are broad aspects on securing applications on cloud, which starts with training and awareness, cloud software assurance and validation, user verified secure software, the software development lifecycle in a secure way, then identity and access management, and the secure software development with specific to the cloud architecture. Okay, so please note that objective of this domain is to design, develop, and deploy a secure application in cloud. Okay, now if all of us refer to our current real life scenario, everybody will understand that many companies are having their current install base already there, which is going to, which they want to migrate to cloud. That's the scenario from where we start our cloud journey. There are few people who start their cloud journey from directly moving into a software as a service thing, but majority of people do not have the convenience of getting into a ready-made software, but they want to move their install base from on-prem to cloud. Now, when we are doing this, there are multiple challenges what organization goes through. The major challenge goes on migration of on-prem or a legacy app to cloud, because these apps, it is, you cannot do a forklifting. Okay, it has to be assessed on whether they are cloud ready, whether these softwares can get migrated and configured on a cloud environment. What are the gaps? Is there any redevelopment or a reconfiguration required? Okay, all those factors are to be assessed when you are deciding to migrate to cloud, and these are migration challenges. And one of the reason for getting into this is lack of enough documentation on a legacy software, also for the softwares which are specifically getting developed for cloud. Because if the controls are not implemented in a proper way, it will have a challenge for a lift and shift. Okay, and also the controls which are implemented at a traditional data center, if you want to replicate the exact same thing in cloud environment, in few scenarios it might not be possible, because the legacy security controls might not be available in the cloud environment, because it is different from the conventional environment. So when you are evaluating this, also there is the requirement which you need to, when now Sumit has asked that how you will analyze. So analysis has to be done by breaking your requirements into three components, like what are your requirements from the perspective of data, what are your requirements from the perspective of the functions related to the application, and what are your processes which you want to replicate to cloud. So when you break these components, you can have a sensitive data stored, you can define your processes, and then this will help you to identify whether are you really cloud ready or it requires a complete revamp. Okay, so for that, again, if you remember what we discussed in our domain 2, okay, this will help you to determine the sensitivity and ask certain questions to define that. So if your data is disclosed, what's the impact? Okay, who are going to access your application? Okay, if outsider gets an access to your processes and manipulate those processes, what is going to be the impact? Okay, if the data integrity is impacted, when you get answer to such questions, you will understand that what is the posture of your on-prem application and what kind of action you require to take to move it to the cloud. Now, when we are discussing a migration to cloud, the most important thing which plays a role, okay, on any application, whether it is a custom made application or it's a SaaS application, the most important part for organization to connect to the cloud environment is API. Okay, are well aware about the APIs. Now, APIs are the interfaces which are provided in case you are going for a SaaS. These interfaces are readily provided by the SaaS providers to the organization. The classic example is if you are, say, developing app like say Zomato, or you are developing your own app where you want to deliver, say, food grains, or you want to deliver any items to a particular region. Okay. Now, for that, you want to know that from where the order is coming, and you want the map to be integrated with your application. Now, there are lots of map application like Google, which are already available in the market. Okay, so you don't have to redevelop the maps on your own. The map is already available, so you can request an API to Google, and you use the Google API. You call it securely in your application, and you get the map services in your app where the customer can place the order. You know the location, and you get it delivered. Okay. Now, when you are using this, the API security plays a vital role. So nowadays there are a lot of secured features like using secure API keys, using the secure connectivity to call the API. API calls management has got implemented both on-prem and cloud applications. When you are using API development normally happens with mostly two well-known processes. One is the REST APIs and one is the SOAP API. So when you are talking about REST API, which in current scenario is used widely by most of the application providers because it's a lightweight, and it is recommended when you have a bandwidth limitation. Okay, so it's a API which is like a software architecture style consisting of guidelines and best practices for creating a scalable web service. So scalability is most important feature of the REST API. The another way of creating a API is using the SOAP method. Okay, simple object access protocol. Now, what is the difference between REST and SOAP? So as the REST is lightweight, SOAP is little heavy. So when you do not have a constraint on your bandwidth, you can still go ahead and use the SOAP APIs. Okay, so mostly people are in current scenario, people are using REST APIs because it is using a HTTP protocol. It is very flexible. It is point to point. It is very easy to use as an organization if you want to implement it. It's not expensive. It supports multiple formats. It supports JSON. It supports YAML. It supports XML. And it's really fast. Vis-a-vis when you compare it with SOAP, which is a kind of a heavy protocol, it supports only XML, and it is mainly used in an enterprise environment. So it's not kind of a open API tool which you can use, and it's a pre-built kind of a tool. So it's a limitation on SOAP. But yes, still it is a workable thing. Okay. But when you are using when you want to deploy your applications on cloud, there are certain common pitfalls. Some of that what we have already discussed. So on-premise applications, you know, are not always easy to transfer, which we have explained and discussed in detail why it is not. REST is also HTTP, but it also supports FTP and SMTP. Okay. Main problem happens when you are discussing about migration of the on-premise or a custom-made apps on cloud is the lack of training and awareness, which we are discussing as a first part. Why lack of training is because when you are having a conventional developers, they are not aware about the security requirements and the configurations which are required on cloud. So if you are not upgrading the skill sets of the developers who are working for an organization, it's going to be a challenge to move your applications on cloud. It can pose a threat from a security perspective. Also, when many organizations are having custom-made applications running on an environment, their applications are pretty complex from an integration perspective. So this complexity, if you are not reducing or you are not addressing, implementing and configuring these applications on cloud is a big challenge. And of course, this challenge is posed because of the native features of cloud, which is multi-tenancy, which we have discussed now multiple times as a major weakness of cloud, which is multi-tenancy. And the administration of cloud is done by the third party. So you are not administrating the cloud from a physical infrastructure perspective. So if these are the major issues which everybody faces, and that is why it's very important point that you should note is that forklifting an application is a process where you migrate the entire application to cloud and you expect it to run as it runs in a cloud, the traditional environment with a minimal code changes, and which is not possible in all scenarios. It's a very important point from an exam perspective, because it will be asked to you that in each application scenario, can you do forklifting? The plain answer is no. Without analysis, you cannot say yes or no. Okay, on a SDLC thing, you should also refer the documentation, which is MSDL, Microsoft Secure Development Lifecycle. It's an open documentation available on Google. You should also refer NIST's 800/64 series, which explains the SDLC related to cloud. So we have discussed that what are the probable issues when you are migrating to cloud. Let us understand the software development lifecycle from a cloud environment perspective. Now, I don't see a major difference. Okay, the difference comes from the point of view of your design, development, and deployment from a cloud environment perspective. So when you are going into, say, planning and requirement analysis, the security requirements are to be added the planning and design phase itself. You cannot add security related concepts when your application is already developed. It has to be added at your design and planning stage itself. It's a most important thing, and that is where, from an agile technology, the DevSecOps has come into the picture, where your development, security, and operations are stitched together to make sure that all the deployments are done in a very efficient way and no issues are faced when a software is deployed on a cloud environment. Okay, now to do that, there are various, software configuration management tools, the SCM tools, which are used from a cloud perspective. Okay. Now, and some of these tools are like, there is a tool called Puppet, which is like configuration management system, which allows to define the state of IT infra and enforce the correct state. Then there is a tool called Chef. These are the tools which are majorly used from a AWS environment perspective, which automates your deployment of infrastructure. Okay, so these kind of a tool help you for a dynamic analysis, the vulnerability assessment, the activity monitoring. So with these tools, you can automate your deployment as a policy, taking care of all the probable threats which are there in cloud. Okay, so this is again revisiting on the API security which I have discussed. Yeah, sometimes there are few questions which come on the tools for which are used, but they are not like what I explained on Puppet and Chef. No, the questions will not come on that, because these are the cloud service provider specific tools. And CCSP does not ask you the CSP specific questions. It's a vendor neutral certification. So you will not get question based on the tool. It can ask you the types of tool, but not on the specific tool. There are specific tools for Google Cloud deployment also. I think on Google it's called something managed API or something like that. I forgot the name of that tool. But even Google, Azure, mainly these leading cloud service provider have all the automation. But AWS is kind of a leader on the deployments. The environment on AWS changes very rapidly. Ansible, Salt, yes, these are also the tools which are very widely used for the cloud deployments. Okay, when you are doing the implementation, okay, you have to make sure that your cloud, that is cybersecurity posture, is correctly described. Your cybersecurity target is currently described. What is the scope of improvement, and what is the progress you want to do from your current state to the future thing. These are few important points which you should keep in mind from the security posture perspective. When you are doing this also leads into kind of a threat analysis or a threat modeling, which is to be done from the cloud environment perspective. Okay, so these are few, and for this I will also recommend that you go through the OWASP top 10, which helps to know that what are the new security threats which are analyzed on a year-on-year basis. And on cloud, these are main threats, the top 9 threats, which is, we have also discussed this in the module 2, which is data breaches, data loss, account hijacking, insecure API, which we have discussed a while ago. That if you are not authenticating your APIs or securing your APIs with API key, it is not a secured thing. Denial of service, where there are the flood of requests coming, and you are not able to provide the service to the customer. Malicious insider, where your former employee or a contractor can misuse the information what he has to have an attack internally on your environment. Misusing the access rights what a current employee have. insufficient due diligence, few of them. Now, when we are discussing about threat, okay, it's very important that from an exam perspective that you should know about the threat modeling. And for that, again, I will recommend that you go through the CISSP CBK and go through the specific explanation on STRIDE. So I hope that you are aware about STRIDE model, which is about spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, escalation of privilege. It's very important from exam perspective. There is a definite exam question on this. Okay, and STRIDE has to be considered at the design stage of application. You cannot add it after your design is complete. So threat modeling is very important from a CCSP exam perspective. Definite question on that. And for that, again, I will recommend that go through the ISO standard 27034, which speaks about secure software development. In a while, I'll again have a word about it when we are discussing about the normative framework related to the organization. Okay. So when you are doing threat modeling and you are taking care of all these things, and you are working on APIs, it is very important when you are working with an external vendor, say software as a service provider, or you are working with an external development agency, that you do a proper software supply chain management. Okay, so if your APIs are taken from an outsider, then you need to make sure that they are properly tested from a security standpoint. You have a proper identity and access management implemented for that. It's very important that all the factors from a self-service or a registration or a password management are taken care of. Again, this is identity and access management is very important topic from exam perspective, because when you are managing identity and access management on-prem, it is handled in a different way because your authentication mechanisms are sitting on-premise along with your application. When you are having a hybrid environment, which is normally a scenario with majority organization, your users are sitting on premise, your authentication mechanism is sitting on premise, and your applications are sitting on cloud. So your identity and access management becomes a very important process from a policy and process management. Now, in that, when you are doing this and you are using multiple softwares which are in-house or externally developed, then various authentication mechanisms play a vital role. Okay, and these access management techniques are used for authentication, authenticating, for authorization, for giving you the required access rights. So authorization is allowing you to enter, but after that, your privileges are to be defined. So that is handled by the identity repository. Okay, and in that, then you have various services like you use the X500 protocol, you use LDAP, you use Microsoft Active Directory. So there are various ways where the authentication is done. And with that, we come to a very important point from a cloud perspective, which is right now, it's kind of a buzzword, which is federated identity management, where you are having multiple organizations accessing each other's data or exchanging the data with each other. There is no need for you exchanging your users credentials with them, and that is where protocols like SAML, that is secure assertion markup language, or OAuth or OpenID are used. With this, you don't have to exchange your user data with another organization, so you can just authenticate the users on your own. The classic example for this can be like, you are accessing, say, a booking.com site, you want to book, say, your air tickets, or you want to book movie tickets, you need not create a fresh account on that site. You normally see that on majority of such sites, you get something like, sign in with Google. So for that, Google is your identity provider. So what happens on booking.com when you say sign in with Google, you are not creating any user ID or password on booking.com. In turn, booking.com speaks to Google. Google authenticates your credentials from the Google database and just gives the token validating that yes, you are a genuine user, and your user ID is automatically, or you already get access on a booking.com. And whatever are your credentials on Google, you get the response on those email IDs or as per those credentials what you have configured. Okay, similar thing you will see, like, somewhere it is like, use your Facebook credentials. So this normally works with the federated identity management. It is one of the safest way of exchanging the data. SAML 2.0 is the most commonly used standard as of today, and this is XML based framework. So, and it is used for communicating user authentication, entitlement, and attribute information. It's very important. It is going to be there in exam, definitely at least a question on SAML specifically. There are other points also, but on SAML, there is definitely a question there. Then other standards are like, OpenID Connect, which is like interoperable authentication protocol based on OAuth 2. So, and current version of OAuth 2 is it's 2.0, which is in use. Okay. So when you are in cloud, okay, in any identity and authentication, there is a relying party and there is a service provider. So when we had a discussion on booking.com, so booking.com, when it is expecting Google to authenticate a user, then booking.com becomes a relying party because it is requesting someone to validate the user, and Google becomes the service provider. Okay. And then there is another way on especially which is for on-premise information, where an organization plays a role of a identity provider or a service provider, and that is called shibboleth standard. So where, you as an organization, you authenticate the user and you provide the access. Okay. Then another factor which is important from identity and access management is SSO, single sign-on. Now in a cloud environment, it is again a kind of a federated SSO also is used. In single sign-on, the most common example for SSO is when you have Google account and you sign in your sign in for Gmail with your Google credentials, you get access to Google Drive, you get access to Google Meet, you get access to Google Docs, Google Sheets, anything which is in the Google application suite, you get access to all. So that is a classic example of single sign-on. This is the way in many organizations the SSO is implemented, which prevents the users from remembering multiple usernames and passwords. And I think this is basic, and all of you must be aware about this. After we have discussed about the identity and access management, on that there are certain supplemental security devices which also should be noted by you as a CCSP aspirants from an exam perspective. So there are certain additional defense layers like, web application firewall, which is a layer 7 firewall and very effective against the DDoS attacks. This especially analyzes the HTTP traffic. Very important from my exam perspective. Then there are various DAM tools, database activity monitoring tools. Again, they work on layer 7 monitoring. I hope that the OSI layers are known to all of you. If not, I will recommend that please go through CISSP CBK to understand the various OSI layers, starting right from layer 1 to layer 7. Okay, that is the physical layer to the application layer. Okay, then agent-based database activity monitoring or a network-based database activity monitoring is also important from the cloud perspective, from identity and access management. XML gateways are also important from a DLP control perspective. The physical security groups, which is like a firewall in cloud, are important. And the most important monitoring tool which is required is for monitoring the API traffic, and that is API gateway. So API gateway is very important as it filters the API traffic, and it can also be used as a proxy. Okay, and it can be implemented across the control rates, and it limits the logging metrics. So you can also, when you are implementing APIs and through API gateways, you can define the usage or traffic which will be generated on APIs. Okay. Another important topic which we have discussed, I think, multiple times during past 3-4 sessions is cryptography. So again, from a security standpoint, for the data in motion, it is very important that you have the TLS or SSL or VPN configured, which will secure your data in motion. And that is again, I think, from CCSP perspective, a very important topic, that the data at rest, the data in motion should be encrypted. Okay, so when you are having data at rest, okay, so you can have a whole instance encryption, which again we have discussed that you can use the advanced encryption standards to encrypt the entire virtual instance. You can have a volume encryption where you can encrypt the entire volume, or you can have a file level encryption. We have also discussed quickly on tokenization, data masking. Okay. Another important topic from software development lifecycle is sandboxing. Okay, it is again from a weightage perspective, there is at least a question on sandboxing. Okay, so sandboxing, I think all of us from a technical background will be aware that sandboxing is basically your test environment. It isolates and utilizes only intended components, which is very important, that your test environment will never have a live data. Okay, so it will always have the intended components while separating the remaining components which are not required for testing the application. Or you will do a randomization where you will remove the live data and you will have certain ad hoc values. Okay, so with this, it is also important that in a cloud environment, normally what you do is you also, apart from all virtualization, you also do the application virtualization. So what is application virtualization? It is, again, in a simple word, you create a virtual environment for an application to run. So it can be your VM based virtualization or a container based virtualization. So it creates an encapsulation from OS, and it isolates the environment for a safe execution of your code. Okay, and main goal for application virtualization is to test application while protecting the operating system and other apps on the system. That is very important. Another factor on application security is the software assurance. So you are ensuring that the software functions as intended on cloud with all the security controls in place. And for that, you do the verification and validation at each stage of the software development and deployment. This is done to ensure the consistency of the application. Okay. So the last module on this domain, what is remaining, is mainly related to application security. And for this, I will recommend that you guys refer to the ISO standard 27034 27034/1, which I have already mentioned a few minutes ago. So it's very important because it defines the security architecture recommendations from a cloud development perspective. Okay, and security of application should not only be considered as a development, but it is also a regulatory and a business context. So it's a very important point, and this framework is highly testable in exam. So it is also called a service oriented architecture. Okay, and in that it's named as organizational normative framework, which is a bidirectional process. It's very important and highly testable under the ISO 27034. Okay, so in organizational normative framework, you normally define the business context, your regulatory context. So why, from which regulation perspective you are having this security control design, what are the technical aspects of this security control. So from a regulatory protection, what technical controls you are implementing, what are the different roles, what are the different processes. Okay, and this organizational normative framework is normally implemented as a application security control library. Okay, so now we have discussed what is business context. Okay, so in business context, you define the security policy for your organization. So what security policy you are referring, what are the standards you are referring, what are the best practices you have already adopted. These all are defined from a business context perspective. When you go to the regulatory context, so what are the different standards, what are the different laws and regulations from a geographical and business region perspective you are following, and which will affect your application security. This will lead to the technical context. So in a technical context, you will also include the required and available technologies that are applicable for the application security. So when your regulatory and business contexts are defined, to safeguard those contexts, what are the technical what are the technological solutions available which you will select, is the technical context. And then we go on specifications. So what is specifications? So these are the documentations of the organizational IT functional requirements and the solutions that are appropriate to address the security requirements. Then you define the roles and responsibilities and qualification for required for implementation of these IT security factors. And application security control library, which contains the approved control required to protect an application. Okay, so this bidirectional process is meant to create a continuous improvement loop for the organization's application security. It's very important from an exam perspective. So normally every organization will have one organizational normative framework, ONF. Okay, and using the ONF, what is defined is application normative framework. So this is used in conjunction with ONF and is created for a specific application. So the organizational normative framework is created on an organizational level. Application normative framework is created on an application level. So ONF to ANF has a one-to-many relationship. So there is only one ONF, but there can be many ANF based on the requirement of organization. Very important from a question perspective, there is a definite exam question on this. And ONF is used to create multiple ANF. So that is a base. When you create an organizational normative framework, it's a base to create the application normative framework. Okay. So using these frameworks, there is something called application security management process, which is created again through the ISO standard 27034-1. And this defines the framework to manage and maintain each application normative framework. Okay, and this will help in specifying the application requirements and environment, assessing application security and its risks, creating and maintaining the application normative framework, provisioning and operating the application, auditing the security of application. Okay, so this is particular aspect of ONF and ANF is very important from exam perspective. So in this domain, what are important topics which you should note down from the exam perspective is the API security. So what is REST versus SOAP? What are the uses? What are the drawbacks? Okay, what are the disadvantages of using unapproved APIs and what are the security risks it carries? You should go through the OAPs, especially from the security standpoint, like, what are the threats leading to SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and what are the solutions on that. So if you are talking about SQL injection or you are talking about the cross-site scripting, input validation will be one of the easy solution to breach these security threats. Then the important topic is SDLC phases, and then the testing of the software. These are the essential topic from the exam perspective. Okay, so this is what I wanted to cover in domain 4. This is a question 1. Correct answer for this is A. I think we just discussed a minute ago, we just discussed that the question is asking what? The question is asking you, according to ISO 27034, there is a one organizational normative framework in the organization and dash application normative framework. I just explained you that the ONF to ANF relation is one to many. Okay, so one organizational normative framework leads to, and it can have a many application normative framework. Let's go to next question. The correct answer here is C. It is asking about the inspection on a secure file transfer protocol. So SFTP protocol normally is done using the XML gateway, and it does not go through the WAF. It is not an application which is going through. So normally the traffic passes through the XML gateway. The correct answer is C. Let's go to question 3. So correct answer here is C. So sandboxing is normally used for testing the software before it is put into production. Absolutely right. That's the next question. The correct answer here is A. So as we discussed during the domain discussion, application virtualization normally is done to make sure that it is the environment agnostic, and you can make it run on any virtualized or a containerized environment. Next question. Asked is a white box testing. SAST is normally used for a code review or a code level testing. Okay. Next question. The correct answer here is B. See, it's typical confusing questions because your major requirement to implement the training program, which I said at the beginning that today the biggest challenge from a cloud security perspective is the training, because your requirements when you move on cloud, your requirements from a regulatory and a legal perspective are huge. And if your staff is not trained from a cloud security perspective, you will definitely end up having the gaps. So your business and security requirements might play a role when you are on-prem, but when you go on cloud, the major requirement on training program is your regulatory and legal requirements. Okay, let's move to next question. So the correct answer here is D. See, again, it's same thing, but you adding the security controls at the first go is something which is a measure. But why you need to train people is because the current modern software development don't understand the code underlying the libraries they use actually work. So when they are using the ready-made libraries, okay, the classes and the DLL files, they don't understand how it works. That's where the training comes into the picture. Okay, so the training is not about when you should add it. The training is about how you should first know that how it works. So that's why the correct answer is D. Let's go to next question. The correct answer here is A. Don't get confused between define and design, because define is the phase where the requirements are defined. So you have to start your security definition right when you are defining your requirements. Design phase is when you actually start putting the perspective to that, but you need to have the security personnel involved right from define stage when the requirements are getting gathered. So the correct answer here is A. Next question. So the correct answer here is D. As here again, please note that in the first session, I told you that CCSP is about you think like a manager. Okay, you are not the doer anymore when you are appearing for the CCSP. So here it is more about thinking like a manager and taking a decision first to notify the required people. So you are not the network or a security administrator who is sitting there and who is taking decision to block these things. So there is a process that if some certain things are not getting followed as per the process, then it has to be escalated, it has to be addressed, and then you have to implement a solution. So with that angle, it is you should first notify to the right hierarchy, get a proper solution on that, and then implement that solution. Okay, and this is where I one more time remind you that there is a book available on Google which is free to download. Think Like a Manager from Luke Ahmed. Please download it. It is applicable for all ISC Square exam. It is more about understanding the process. I used it for both CISSP and CCSP. It has covered some 25 different questions explaining how should you think in each scenario. It will help you to remove the typical doer hat and you can, get into a more of a manager hat. Okay. Last question. So the correct answer for this question is D. Federation is for giving you the access without actually transferring the identity data, and that is where federated identity is most commonly used feature today. Okay, so that brings us to the end of domain 4. I hope you have got a clarity